Okay, I hit it. 1,000 videos. This is it. So I was talking to my daughter, Alyssa, about it, and she said, you ought to come up with something really good for your 1,000th video. And I said, you got any ideas? She says, why don't you do a story about how you got started in the tree business in the first place? Well, that's actually a pretty good story. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into how I decided that tree work was for me. How I came to the conclusion that I was going to make this my career. Hope you enjoy this. It's kind of a long drawn out story, and it goes way back in time to when I was in high school. Boy, I'm going back in history now. I started high school in 1968. Graduated in 1972. Very important to recognize that during my high school years, the Vietnam War was raging. It was in full swing. I had a stepbrother who was over in Vietnam, and he was sending letters home. I had plenty of friends. I knew families who lost sons. And quite frankly, I was terrified. I had a bad draft number. They had the lottery system back then. And my number meant when I got out of high school, I was going to Vietnam. So my senior year, that was the overwhelming heavy weight on my shoulders. I mean, it was huge. That's all I could think about. I did poorly in my school studies. I knew I wasn't going to make it into college because my grades weren't good enough. I struggled, and I was an emotional mess. But my last couple of years of high school, I really got into rock climbing in a big way. That was my sport. Other people were playing football and basketball and all the other things. I did play a bit of soccer, but basically my main sport was rock climbing. I just loved rock climbing. I was passionate about it. Fortunately, halfway through my senior year, they wrapped up the war and they abolished the draft, and this elephant-sized weight was lifted off of my shoulders. It was huge. I was free. All my other friends decided they were going to go to college. I was going to Yosemite. That was what was most important to me. You see, I was a really avid rock climber all through high school, mostly the last 2 years. And I just about lived up at Castle Rock. I had a little Honda 90, and a good friend of mine, Mark Chapman, and we ventured up into climbing areas almost daily. I actually lived the last half of my senior year in an apartment with 4 other rock climbers, and the guy that was in charge of the rock climbing group made sure that everybody worked out, and that's all I cared about. I wanted to get fit, I wanted to get strong. So every single night, this is while I'm in high school, every single night back to the apartment after I got back from work. I was working in a grocery store. I had to ride my bike there and back. I was doing about 30 miles a day on my 10-speed. I'd get back about 9:30 at night, and we'd do our pull-ups. And we went around in a circle. Dan McHale, he was the man. He pushed everybody. Everybody was pushing each other and egging each other on. Do more, go, come on, one more. And I reached a point where I got up to doing 28 pull-ups. So that was my record. But the thing was, we'd do as many as we could at first, then it would go all the way around and come back to you, and you had to do as many as you could, and we kept going and going until nobody could do another pull-up. And then we ran. We ran 2 miles down to a rock wall at a shopping center, and for a half hour, an hour, we'd climb on this rock wall and just stretch our arms and get our hands, and we'd walk home, and the next day we'd start all over again. The weekends were saved for climbing adventures. We'd go to Yosemite, we'd go to Pinnacles, we'd go anywhere, sometimes just Castle Rock, but we climbed hard and climbed often. So rock climbing was my life. Getting back to my high school days, when that elephant-sized burden was lifted off my shoulders, I was currently taking metal shop, and I thought, well, I'm going to make some of my own climbing gear. So I learned how to cast these wedges and cast these, climbing chalks, and I built this bear box. Because I had in the back of my mind, I was thinking, okay, there's bears in Yosemite. I want to build something that can protect my food. And I got a lot of good bear stories, but I won't go into that right now. So I built this box. It was about 3 feet by 2 feet by about 3 feet high, and it was solid steel with welded edges. And I lined the inside with 3/4 inch plywood. It was a big, heavy box that with a big hasp on the front so I could lock it. And ultimately, it did turn out to be a real blessing because it was a place that was too heavy for people to run away with it, so I could lock up all my climbing gear and put all kinds of stuff in there. Long and the short of it, high school finished up. I quit my job, moved to Yosemite, and because I knew a lot of people in the valley already, I was kind of a shoe-in to get into the search and rescue camp. And the thing about it was, if you worked in the search and rescue camp, or even if you were just on call to be there in case there was a rescue or in case there was a search or sometimes a fire, the rangers wanted you there. So they looked the other way when they come around to collect. So I lived in Yosemite Valley for almost a year in an 8x10 canvas tent. I had a little mattress in there. I had my bear box for a little table. I had a little lantern, a little bookcase, a little rug. I mean, it was like the Taj Mahal of campsite tents. I could stand up in my tent. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I had the time of my life. I really, really did. I climbed every day. I got so fit. Got into photography, did a lot of reading. I think that was, I hate to say that was the best year of my life, but it was definitely the freest time in my life. I had no responsibilities. I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids. I didn't have any bills. I didn't have anything that was tying me down. So my commitment to rock climbing was very real. Let's go back to high school. Before I moved up there, I had this really strong goal to climb El Capitan. I mean, that was my main drive. That was what I was striving for. So before high school was out, I had actually attempted El Capitan 3 times, and I had 3 failures. First failure, I tried the dihedral wall with a guy named Roy Nas, and he took a bad fall and he broke his foot. So we had to get back down off that climb. We made it up about 800 or 900 feet. The second time I went with another guy named Dave Pedersen. We tried the dihedral wall again. We got higher this time, and unfortunately Dave took a really bad fall, and I was on a spot, he was above an overhang, and he took a fall and he swung around and slammed into the wall and dislocated his shoulder. That's a whole story in itself, but I had to lower him all the way to the ground. We were 1,000 feet plus. Third time was May of 1972. 2000, what's the matter with me? 1972, yeah, I'm old. So I went back up there. I was still in high school. I cut school for a week because that's what was really important to me. Went up there to climb. We decided to do a different route. We failed on the dihedral wall, so I decided to do what was known as the triple direct route. And that was kind of, I'd say, the best of 3 routes combined. It was the mirror wall, the solithe wall, and the nose. The last part of it was the nose route. So we were completely prepared. And I need to tell you that back when I first started climbing was a completely different type of sport. It was pitons. It was carrying a hammer with you. It was shoes that were kind of big and clunky and not really refined. It was in the early days of what's been referred to as the golden era of rock climbing. And we were taking some heavy stuff up there. We had a haul bag that weighed about 80 pounds. We had about 5 gallons of water in there and just a mountain of steel and carabiners and 2 ropes and stuff to sleep in and all. It was a major expedition. So long story short, we made it 2/3 the way up the triple direct route and made it up a little bit higher than this. This is about the halfway point. And I was the one that had the problem this time. I got hit on the head with a rock, should have been wearing a helmet, and we made the decision to try to get down. Rangers came out. They wanted to do a full-scale rescue for us, but we refused, and I was really sick. Dave was panicking. He was so upset. Anyway, to make it a long story short, we ended up taking a day and a half rappelling all the way to the ground, and the news media was down there, and we became headline news across the nation. We saw ourselves on the 11 o'clock news when we got home. There's Blair, 18-year-old, and Dave Pedersen. Climbers crawl off El Capitan. So I'm living in Camp 4, and everybody kind of knew my story. And I met up with a couple of guys. That was Mark Axon and Mike McEwen. They were from Arizona. And they said, let's go finish that climb. Let's do it. And I said, yeah, right on, man. Let's do it. So we did it. The three of us did the same climb, and we had the time of our life. It was so much fun. There was no anxiety. There was no stress. There was no worry. I mean, we just went up there, and, we took our time, because the gear was so heavy, and there was three of us. It took us 5 days, but boy, we picked some great campsites. There's some nice ledges up on the face of El Cap, and we really, I'm so happy. Unfortunately, the only camera we had was this cheap Instamatic, and these are the pictures that Mike took. So that's me there, and here we are getting closer to the top. It was just amazing. The climb, the weather was perfect. I just couldn't say enough about it. The fact that I finally accomplished, there we are going over the top. That's right up near the very, very tip top. And we're still working our way up. The fact that I finally accomplished this goal that I had through high school meant that I wasn't a failure. I think I would have been so depressed if I had not completed it. But it was something to be proud of for the rest of my life. So about halfway up El Cap on a ledge, and I'm sleeping in a sleeping bag, and I'm having a nightmare. I'm just tossing and turning. My calves are aching from climbing all day long, and I'm having a really hard time, and I finally fall into a deep, deep sleep. And in my dream, I remembered that I was climbing El Cap, and I was unclipped and I fell. And in my dream, I'm falling to my death, and I can see the ground coming up, and I'm tossing and turning on this ledge. I'm tied in, but I had about 8 feet of tie-in. And just as I woke up, I rolled off the ledge and fell about 8 feet. So I went from a dream of falling towards the ground to waking up my eyes and seeing the ground coming at me. And it jerked me and pulled me up. Sleeping bag slipped down almost off my legs. I pulled my legs up and caught it at my knees and pulled it back up. Had to hold the sleeping bag in my teeth and climb the rope to get back up on the ledge. And I just sat there all night long shivering, just thinking, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. So I had to get up in the morning and continue climbing with hardly any sleep at all. So, got a lot of good stories from when I was in Yosemite, of course. I got a lot of good bear stories. I had a few close encounters with bears. One time it was in the summertime, it was so hot that I left the tent door open, and I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a bear sitting on my chest. His butt was right here in my face. He had me pinned and he was scratching like a dog. And I lifted my head up and it was like fur right in my face. It scared the crap out of me. All I could do was just lay still. Finally, he got up and wandered off. But I was like, okay, these are big animals. Another time I came back and there was a bear in my tent again. He had torn a hole in my tent and he had gone inside. And I came back on my bicycle and I had this big chain around my neck with a big lock on it. The bear trashed my tent and the tent is collapsing. And all of a sudden, my bear box, that was probably over 100 pounds, maybe 150 pounds, came flying out of the tent and smashed into a tree. And I had some food in there. The bear wanted at it. So he came wandering out and he came walking right next to me. And there was a Park Service bear box right next to it. It was a great big thing that everybody put their food in, which is what I should have done. So I got mad, so I went over and I slammed my chain down and the lock, thinking that it was going to scare the bear away. Did just the opposite, pissed him off. He stood up right in front of me and a claw went right past me as he swooped past me, I took a few steps back and realized that was the stupidest thing I could have done. See, we'd gotten used to scaring bears away. We'd bang pots and pans together. They'd come walking through our tank. You know, we'd yell at them. They'd run off. This bear was not the same. He was mad. Or she was mad. I don't know. It could have been a mother with cubs someplace. And long and short of it, I had a real close encounter with a big bad animal, and had a whole new world of respect for bears. But I tell you, it was a great time in my life. It really was a wonderful way for me to learn who I was. And after staying there for a year and doing lots and lots of climbing, I did most of the big walls that I really wanted to, Leaning Tower, and you know, I climbed on Half Dome and El Cap. I was doing all kinds of big stuff. I came to the conclusion that I didn't want to be just another climbing bum. I wanted a career. So I moved back to San Jose, and while I was in San Jose, I met up with Paul Risk, and we went to work together. And back then, we'd pretty much do anything. He had a big truck. It was a 1956 GMC with no dump. It had 4-foot sides, looked like an old military truck, and it was built like a tank. And we would do anything. You know, we would haul trash, we would break out concrete, we'd dig out stumps, but every time I got into a tree job, I thought, you know, this feels right. This is what I want to do, you know. But in all honesty, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was very young. I was only 19 years old. This is 1973. So I got good with a chainsaw. I knew how to climb. I was a really good rock climber. So my strength and my climbing skills, they transferred over to tree work quite well. However, tree work and rock climbing, they're very different activities. You know, the ability to tie knots and the ability to work with the ropes and be comfortable, that is very similar. But, you know, roping down limbs and working with, you know, chainsaws and equipment and how to protect plants and all that, that was quite the learning experience for me. Frankly, I made a lot of mistakes too. So I've decided to compile a whole bunch of my stories from my past that better explains why I decided to become an arborist, why I decided, first I had to learn to be a tree worker and understand it. And the arborist certification process had not even been around. It didn't start until the late 80s, and I was certified in 1990, so it's been 31 years since I got my certification. But way back then, it was a real learning experience. It was you didn't have a lot of good mentors to teach you the right way of doing things. You know, you were lucky if you found a quality tree worker that taught you the old world ways of doing things. And I was very fortunate. I did meet up with a guy that kind of took me under his wing. He was in his 60s and I was 19. But he taught me all the old school tree work and all the old school techniques, which I'm glad I learned. But as I was getting a little bit older, I was thinking, no, that's not right. You know, he taught me how to fill cavities with concrete. I thought, oh, okay, well, that's all been disproven. And later on in my life, I thought, okay, I made a lot of mistakes in my early years. And yeah, I topped a bunch of trees. I used to wear spurs in trees. And, you know, I did things as most people were doing it back then. But, you know, there was something about it. It just didn't quite feel right. It was like, you know, I'm damaging the trees if I'm wearing spurs. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So long and the short of it is I'm really glad I became certified because that gave me a direction to continued education and continued personal improvement in the career that I chose and the career that I've made my life all about. Okay, that was the abridged version of my story of how I began and why I got involved in tree work in the beginning. It came from a love of rock climbing and a need to be working outdoors. It also came from a need to stay fit. You know, I'm a very strong believer in keeping your body toned and continually working out. And even to this day, I'm almost 68 years old, and you know, I still feel like a 30-year-old, you know. The long and the short of it is I intend to keep working at this channel. I intend to keep doing the videos. I intend to continue being an educator to the best of my ability. So all of you who've been following me all these years, thank you very, very much. I appreciate all the comments. I appreciate the fact that you subscribe to my channel and you know, give me a thumbs up. That does help with the YouTube algorithms a little bit. But for those of you who just enjoy learning about trees, I'm equally happy that you follow along, because if you know the right way to do things or understand some of the concepts, then you too can become an educator. You can teach your children. Maybe this is something that you could pass on to someone else that may be having a tree being butchered, and you say, no, that's not the way you want to do that. But more importantly, why you don't want to do it. Thanks again. You take care and be safe out there.